Hey guys, if you're interested in checking out a video version of the show, please visit the LOWKEY Geek channel on YouTube. There you can not only catch the video version of the podcast, but you can also check out my other projects and short form video that I produce. You can find a link in the description. Otherwise, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Paramount scrambles its jets and moves Top Gun 2 to 2022. Looks like we're going to get a brand new Rocketeer movie. And Frank Oz isn't getting enough love from Disney. Why is my shirt wrinkled? It's laundry day. And it's time for another episode of the Talking Talk Podshowcast. So let's get to it. What's going on, guys and gals? Welcome to another episode of the Talking Talk Podshowcast, your unofficial weekly pop culture podcast, video show, whatever you want to call it. But hopefully you are spending some time and joining me as I recap some of the top stories of the week. As I mentioned previously in my last episode, I am recording this episode a little bit earlier in the week. I am going on a little vacation for Labor Day weekend. So just wanted to make sure I get something out there for you guys. So if there's some news that dropped that happens to be big towards the end of the week, more than likely I will have a chance to talk about that in the next episode. But thank you guys as always for all your support and joining. For the audio listeners, thank you as well. Again, let me get this out of the way as always. If you like what you see, hit that like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. Again, these are the great free ways to show your love and support to little old me. And what really helps is if you follow and download the episodes on your podcast platform of choice, where you could find Talking Talk every week on there, as well as some future episodes that will be launching very soon. So again, thank you guys. I hope you are all gearing up for a nice Labor Day weekend here in the US. Yeah, it's one of those last hurrahs for summer. And you know, the summer has been a very interesting one, especially for myself, where because of the absence of movie going last year due to the pandemic, I have been watching a lot of movies. And it's been mixed feelings being back in the movie theaters. It was great in the very beginning because I felt like, there was a great sense of distancing, and I felt, comfortable in not being so close to anyone. And now, just recently I watched Candyman, and, people just don't seem to care much about the distancing anymore. And, there was a family of like 12 that decided to come and watch Candyman, all of which seemed to be like kids in their early teens, which I found very interesting for a movie like that. And yes, there was a baby. They brought a baby in the movie theater to watch Candyman. So, I'll leave my thoughts on that for a future episode. But the reason why I'm talking about movies, and if you've watched or listened to my last episode, I was very much excited to hear about Top Gun 2, or Top Gun Maverick, as the official title is, because CinemaCon happened recently and Paramount did their presentation and they talked a lot of good stuff about Top Gun 2. They showed the beginning of the movie, I think the first 15 minutes of the movie, and from what I heard, it was spectacular and it had all the nostalgia feels to it and all that. Well, today is Wednesday, and it was announced by Paramount that they have decided, because of COVID concerns with the new Delta variant, that Top Gun Maverick will now be moved to 2022. Its planned release date was November of this year, November 19th to be specific. And now they are pushing it to May 27, 2022. Memorial Day weekend. It looks like they really want to capitalize on a holiday weekend, and they're hoping that by then, Delta concerns will be a little less, and hopefully the pandemic will be in a better spot. But yeah, I'm really bummed out about that. But before I get into that, they've also announced other dates that have been moved around. Jackass Forever, which was supposed to open up in October 22nd, will now be moving to February 4th, 2022. And Mission Impossible 7, which was originally slated to open on May 27, 2022, which is the new date of Top Gun Maverick, that will now open up on September 30th, 2022. So some movement there. But yeah, I'm bummed. I gotta be honest, I am bummed about Top Gun 2, Top Gun Maverick, because I was and still am a huge fan of the original movie, and I have fond memories of that movie. I watched it in the theater. I was probably too young to watch that in the theater, but it was the 80s. I mean, I feel like parents took their kids to watch movies that they probably shouldn't have, but the movie itself is one of those classic 80s movies of the time. Tom Cruise was blowing up, really hitting his mark there in the 80s. We were introduced to Val Kilmer, and the relationship between Maverick and Goose, that still holds up today. And like I said, hearing all the great news that broke from CinemaCon about Top Gun Maverick really got me pumped even more so. I mean, watching the trailer alone was exciting enough, and I really couldn't wait to see what was gonna be in store for us with this new movie. So it is unfortunate, but it does look like Hollywood studios are taking the Delta variant very seriously. And if you've been paying attention to box office numbers like I have been on a weekly basis, we're not anywhere close to where we were pre-pandemic as far as revenue is concerned for movies that are released in cinemas. Earlier in the summer, we saw a glimpse of hope of things getting back to what they could have been with the release of Kong versus Godzilla. I believe that pulled in around 55 million or 57 million opening weekend. Fast and Furious, which did really well. Black Widow pulled in like 80 million. So it looked like we were about to get back to how things were. And then Delta came across and started spreading out more and more, causing more concerns. And then the box office numbers have dropped significantly. Candyman opened up recently like a little bit above 20 million. And that is considered a triumph for what we've been seeing lately. So Hollywood's taking these things seriously. I believe Sony was also toying around with the idea of pushing Venom 2 out even further. We will wait and see what the reaction is, because Top Gun is considered to be one of the top tier movies of the year. A lot of anticipation for that. So we'll see what happens. It looks like Warner Brothers and Disney are pretty firm with their dates, especially with Shang-Chi opening up this weekend. And Eternals opening up in a couple of months. So we'll see what happens if any other studio, balks and kind of, decides to change their release dates once again. After a year of tons of speculation of release dates moving and shifting and all that. So regardless, if these dates stick, 2022 is looking to be a pretty big year for movies once again. Hopefully things will get back to normal and we could all enjoy watching movies in the cinemas there. So yeah, but like I said, I can't help but be a little bit bummed about this, because again, this is a movie that I was eagerly anticipating. So, but with that being said, some good news and exciting news that came out earlier this week was that it looks like Disney Plus is gearing up to produce a new Rocketeer movie. The Rocketeer is making a comeback on Disney Plus. The original movie opened up, I believe, in 1991, if I remember correctly. And it, throughout the years, it became a very huge cult classic. I'm sure most people never watched the movie when it came out. I, for one, also have fond memories of this movie. I watched it in the theaters with one of my brothers, and I loved it. I enjoyed the movie all the way through. I still consider The Rocketeer to be a top 10 comic book movie, in my opinion. It ranks right up there with The Crow and, obviously the earlier Marvel films and what have you. The Nolan Dark Knight movie with Batman. But the one thing I will say about the original Rocketeer was that with myself approaching my mid-teens, it was quite a big sexual awakening when I saw Jennifer Connelly on the big screen there, and I'll leave it at that. But the whole movie, again, was quite enjoyable. It was very close to like those serialized action shows that people used to watch in the 50s on TV, or the serials that you listen to on the radio. It is based off of a very old comic, that featured a lot of fights with Nazis. So if you're like a huge Indiana Jones fans and you're a big fan of that era, especially like action movies, this was definitely up there. And it was just a fun movie, very enjoyable. And it's nice to see that now is probably a good time to bring that IP back, because I think there's a lot of things they can do with it. And right now it looks like they have a pretty interesting idea, which I'm pretty down for. So it looks like the new movie is going to focus around a retired Tuskegee Airman who takes up the mantle of the Rocketeer, which I think is a pretty cool idea. I like the sound of that. It will star David Oyelowo, better known as he's the one who portrayed Dr. Martin Luther King in Selma. And it looks like he will be a producer on this project as well. So really, really excited and interested to see what's going to come out of this movie. It would have been nice to hear that they were going to think of putting this into cinemas and into the theaters. Not sure how I feel about it being just a Disney Plus movie. I hope that doesn't mean that the quality is going to be bad, but if you've watched any of the Disney Plus releases that went directly to Disney Plus, pretty decent stuff overall. Let's not forget about what they've been doing with Star Wars, with The Mandalorian, and Marvel with, the WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, or I should say Captain America and the Winter Soldier, and Loki. So if that says anything, then I'm hoping that this new Rocketeer will really, really look great and feel great and just tell a great story. I just, like I said, this is a type of character and movie that they could do so many things with. Especially around that, the time that this character takes place, this character lives in. So really, really exciting. I hope that they do a good job, and I can't wait to see what happens there. So really interesting stuff there. Another bit of interesting news that broke out, this time in video games, China. It appears that China has decided to roll out new limits on game playing by minors. So the new rule basically says that it would prohibit children from playing video games entirely from Monday through Thursday. So that means if you were a child living in China, or if you are a child living in China, you will be allowed to play games Friday through Sunday along with public holidays, but limiting it for only 1 hour of gaming a day between the times of 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. It looks like this is an addition to some other measures that China has been implementing for gaming companies in China to really focus and hone in on gaming habits of minors. Now, one of the first questions I had in my mind when I read this is, well, how the hell are they going to enforce it, right? Let's not forget that China is still a communist country. They do limit and monitor what is exposed to the people who live there. So basically, like, for example, There are a lot of bans on Google, Facebook. That's why they have a lot of their own search engines and social platforms there. So they really do monitor and control a lot of what is being exposed to the people who live in China. So I'm sure it's not going to be that hard to be able to monitor all this stuff. The one thing I did read that is very fascinating is that earlier in the year, Tencent, who is one of the biggest gaming companies there in China, they launched a facial recognition technology in its games that they put out to prevent children from playing games between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. So if you are a child in China and you're playing one of the Tencent games, if you log in on your mobile phone, the camera will I guess there's a facial scan before the game launches, and it won't launch unless it scans your face. So if you're a child and it scans your face, oh look, you're a child, sorry, you can't play, it's already 11 p.m., go to bed. So really interesting stuff there. And what is this going to do for the industry? Here in the States, I don't think it's really going to do that much. However, I'm sure it will pique the interest of some parental groups and some other organizations out there who have always been complaining about the exposure of kids and technology, especially when it comes to smartphones and the internet and video games. It's always been a huge battle on how many hours should a child be on TV watching TV. How many hours should a child be surfing the internet or being on their phones? And it's kind of hard, especially here in the States, and I'm sure it's like this a lot in other countries. But if you are a busy parent and you just need a timeout for yourself, or maybe you have a very hyperactive child who always constantly needs to be doing something, and I've seen this in person, and I've also seen this with family members and what have you. They will just give the child a phone, pop on a game, and let them go to town with it. And this is now their distraction for the next hour or two. And because of this type of mentality, and it happens a lot, kids, as they grow up, they tend to, kind of have this reliance on technology to entertain them, distract them. Maybe it's the only form of entertainment that they know at the time. And so they take that with them as they grow up. Some kids have developed dependencies on this too, and it causes depression, and it causes anxiety and social awkwardness, because all they're doing is constantly looking at their phones. And I can see how that is a huge concern, and I can see how many parents and organizations and groups out there will look into what China is doing and say, how can we incorporate that here? Now, it's going to be a little harder, I'm sure, but I won't be surprised if there's talks going around about it right now. Years ago, there was a lot of controversy and complaints about kids who would play these games on their phones that belong to their parents, or they're using accounts that belong to their parents, and they'll start purchasing in-game stuff through those accounts. And then before you know it, a parent gets the bill the next month, and it's like $500, $1,000, huge amounts of money, right? I'll never forget, and I'm dating myself, and I don't know if a lot of you remember, but there was a Smurfs mobile game that came out some time ago, a long time ago. And basically, it's one of those mobile games where you're just building up your Smurf village, right? You could build your houses, and then you have to do farm work to create resources and all that kind of stuff like that. Unlock your neighbors, which could be Papa Smurf or Smurfette or what have you. And the game offered in-game purchasing to purchase like upgrades and purchase materials and new things and all that. And kids were just going to town buying these things because they were never forewarned that, hey, by the way, this is using real money, real life funds. And there were tons and tons of complaints from parents saying, oh my God, all of a sudden now I owe $5,000 because of this stupid Smurfs game, right? And I know that caused a lot of controversy, and it caused a lot of discussion around in-app purchases and in-game purchases and all that. So now there's a lot of warnings ahead of time, especially when you download something. Like, they will always tell you in advance, game will include in-app purchasing or whatever have you, just to give you guys a heads up and everything. So really interesting to see how this is going to play out. We may not know the full effects because, again, China is very cautious with what kind of information or communications are leaked out of China. But very interesting stuff here. And in a way, I got to give them props for curtailing a problem that is really existing here in the world, as far as technology dependencies. And we all suffer from it too, I mean, when I wake up in the morning, I try my best not to look at my phone first thing, but sometimes it's so easy to, right? Because you want to know, what alerts did I get? What's going on Twitter? What's happening on Facebook? What's the latest Instagram post or what have you? Me being a content creator, I'm always looking on YouTube. It's like, all right, what's the newest videos? How did my other video do? Are there any comments? I need to reply to my comments, which I love doing. But, if you don't really set a schedule for yourself or set some time just for you, turn all that crap off for a little bit every now and then. It really helps your mental state, and with the type of year and a half that we've had with Corona and now Delta, a lot of our mindsets and the mentalities around the world is just not in a good spot, right? So I find it extremely helpful just to turn off every now and then, or just curtail it during the week or during the day, because I think too much dependency on technology can be a bad thing. And it's nice just to be able to, maybe just sit in a room and not have to worry about what's going on online. Or when you're taking a trip, don't always focus on taking pictures or posting your updates of where you are always online, whether it's like Instagram or Twitter. Sometimes it's good just to not always have to do that, right? You can always go back to it, but take a break. I think it's very, very helpful. And trust me, your mental state would probably be in a better place, right? So, and don't get me started on some of you out there who, release all your aggression and your grievances on Facebook. I mean, the amount of posts I see about someone complaining about this or that, or, I literally, without naming any names, I literally have a friend on Facebook that I could pretty much gauge the amount of depression this person has gone through from pre-pandemic to now, and how the mental state has just been in a steady decrease, right? And, all of us, we're trying our best to cheer that person up and, joke around and all that, but it just, you could see it, how it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And, sometimes that could be a good thing, so we can see signs if someone really is in desperate need of help. And, I've said this before, help is always out there for anyone who needs it. You just have to take that step and go out there and reach out for it, right? Talk to somebody, tell a friend, tell a family member. There's always someone who's going to be out there willing to listen to you, right? So, but yeah, it's just really, really interesting. And, we'll see what happens here, but I think this is a very interesting piece of news that came out. So let me know your thoughts on this and the other stuff I've talked about so far. Again, don't forget, leave your comments. I reply to the comments as often as possible. I love having conversations with the viewers of my channel and the listeners of the podcast. That's why I'm here, trying to connect with all of you so that we can have great discussions and build this community up. So, the last piece of news, and again, this is probably going to be a smaller episode because, again, I am doing this way earlier than I would have normally. But this is something that also touches me very deeply in the feels and in my heart. And because of my childhood and how I grew up. So Frank Oz. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Frank Oz, but for those of you who may not, Frank Oz, let's go back to Top Gun, right? Maverick had Goose. That was his guy, right? Every time they were in the thick of it, Goose was there. Well, until he died, unfortunately. But spoiler alert. But Frank Oz is the Goose of Jim Henson. To Jim Henson, right? Jim Henson is the creator of the Muppets. He's the one that helped create Sesame Street. Frank Oz was with Jim Henson from the early beginnings. They were partners. They were, Frank Oz considers Jim to be like a brother to him. Frank Oz was responsible for not only the puppeteering, but the voices of a lot of characters that we grew up with. If you were a child of the 70s or 80s, you are very familiar with the Muppets and Sesame Street, and into the 90s as well and all that. But Frank Oz is responsible for the voices of Fozzie Bear, Miss Piggy, Cookie Monster, Bert, Grover, Animal, Sam the Eagle, just to name a few. In the Star Wars universe, Frank Oz is the one who gave us Yoda. He was the one who puppeteered and voiced Yoda. Still does on occasion too, which is great to hear and all that. So, and then later on in life, Frank Oz also became a very prominent director. A lot of the movies, some of you may be very familiar with, and some of these movies are some of my favorite movies too. Little Shop of Horrors, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, What About Bob, Bowfinger. Bowfinger. Bowfinger is one of the most underrated Eddie Murphy movies out there. It's Eddie Murphy and Steve Martin. And just to give you a quick premise, Steve Martin is a movie director who's, down and out in his luck, trying his best for so many years to hit that, to write that, and to write and direct that huge Hollywood movie. And Eddie Murphy plays this, let's compare him to like a Will Smith. He plays like the Will Smith movie star and all that. And of course, hijinks ensues and all that. And Steve Martin tries to do a movie with this star without him knowing. And I'll just leave it at that. I won't spoil it. I should probably do a watch along or some sort of commentary for that movie, because that movie is so good. I actually just watched it like a month ago and it still holds up. But yeah, Frank Oz directed that movie. So Frank Oz has been a part of the Muppets for a very long time, up until I would say the late 2000s. Well, not late 2000s, but like around 2000-ish, right? So Frank Oz did a interview recently with The Guardian, and I will include a link in the description of this video and the podcast for you audio listeners out there. And basically, we come to find out that Frank Oz has never retired officially from the Muppets. However, it doesn't look like Disney wants to include him with any projects that they've been working on, which is fascinating to me, which is really, really fascinating. And I'm going to read you a little excerpt from this article that basically points out why Frank Oz feels this way and all that. And basically it goes like this. Oz hasn't worked with the Muppets since 2007, and it's been assumed that he'd retired or was retired. But that assumption is incorrect. Quote from Frank Oz himself: "I'd love to do the Muppets again, but Disney doesn't want me, and Sesame Street hasn't asked me for 10 years. They don't want me because I won't follow orders and I won't do the kind of Muppets they believe in," he says. He can't bear to watch the Muppets or Sesame Street today because the soul's not there. The soul is what makes things grow and be funny, but I miss them and love them. And that's sad. That's really, really, really sad. You have one of the founding fathers of the Muppets and Sesame Street still alive and kicking. I believe he's like 80 now or approaching 80. and he can't even work with the creation that he helped create. Now, I don't know if anyone of you have watched any of the recent iterations of the Muppets on Disney. Sesame Street is no longer in public, television. It's now on HBO Max. So you basically now have to pay to watch Sesame Street, which I have my own thoughts about. Especially when you look at the deep roots of how Sesame Street started and why it started the way it did. But the Muppets recently, even though as someone who grew up with the Muppets, I will always have that nostalgia feeling connected to it, and I will always watch whatever they put out. And when you first start watching, especially the latest Muppets Now that hit Disney Plus, I believe a year or two ago. In the very beginning, the first couple of episodes, it was very cute. I was like, oh my God, look at that. That's really funny. They're really trying to hone in on the current trends of today. You have Miss Piggy doing, yes, it was a year ago because the whole premise was that everyone was on Zoom. And they're trying to organize the show through Zoom. You have, Scooter trying to, wrangle everyone together and trying to upload clips for their show that they're trying to put together. Miss Piggy did like a fashion show, very much like something you would see on E! So she had certain guests, but she will always talk about her style, her fashion style, and the trends that she's into and all that. And it was a very, very cute premise until you've seen it over and over and over again. It looks like they just kept writing the same joke until you were blue in the face, right? Or they were blue in the face, or someone was blue in the face. But it looked like they just couldn't think of anything different, and it made the show stale and not that funny anymore. And I remember watching it, and after a while, I was just like, it felt like a chore. It's like, well, when are they gonna throw something new out there? Okay, we get it. Yeah, Miss Piggy's doing the fashion blog and all that stuff like that, and Kermit is, trying to interview celebrities, but always getting interrupted. Beaker and Bunsen, they're trying to do like a Mythbusters type of show, which in the beginning was really, really funny. It was really, really well thought out. But then it just got like repetitive, and when the Muppets first came out, and maybe it's just a sign of the time that we're in now, I don't know. And this is something I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to do a deeper dive into Muppets then and now. But when the Muppets came out, it was because Jim Henson was trying to do something different. He was trying to incorporate his brand of humor and television to a more adult-oriented audience with the Muppets. I'm not talking about Sesame Street. I'm talking about the Muppets. And he was trying to prove that this type of entertainment can hit really well with audiences, whether you're young, middle-aged, old. It's something that was very fresh and new. The Muppets, when you look at the older episodes, they didn't always cater to a younger crowd. They did a lot of stuff that were very, adult focused. And, just like how Warner Brothers, does it with their Looney Tunes and all that, they always had something there extra for the adults, so that someone like me, my age now, will really appreciate. But someone me at the age back then thought it was cute because he had a bunch of these Muppets singing songs and telling corny jokes and slapstick comedy and all that stuff like that, and that was really all like good. So everyone watching was entertained for a different reason, right? Shows today, you're dealing with a more ADD type of crowd. They something will land for like a minute, but then they need something fresh, like soon. Like, come on, keep it rolling, keep it rotating, right? That's why you have things like TikTok and, YouTube Shorts now being so popular with the younger generation, because they like quick things. And I feel like most of the time, if you don't capture an audience within the first 2 minutes, first minute, or what have you, you lost them, right? And sometimes when you watch the Muppets, it's worth to kind of keep going, because then they hit you with something at the end, or it's something that will last, as far as the comedy elements will last throughout the entire 30 minutes or what have you. Like there's a theme, right? And a lot of this stuff back then was very thematic. But I feel like now, in going back again to technology, the Muppets, they don't really appeal to many of today's generation, because they're used to seeing things like that are so high tech out there now, and the charm is not where it should be, you know. And maybe this is to Frank Oz's point, the soul is missing, right? It's no longer you trying to connect with the Muppets, just like how I felt back then. Because the Muppets always did something that tried to connect to the audience, something personal, something emotional. Now it's almost as if they're just parroting everything that you see around you. And that was always a part of the Muppets. Like parodies was always a part of the humor, but they mixed it in with a lot of the more connecting elements, a lot of the more emotional stuff. And I think that type of humor no longer sits that well now with today's crowd. One of the reasons why you don't see a lot of those parody movies, like, you know, your Naked Guns or your Hot Shots or scary movies or whatever, is because they don't seem to land that well anymore with audiences. And also a lot of those, the more recent ones that they try to do, just sucked. I mean, it was just painful to watch. But I feel people are over that type of comedy for some reason, right? It has to be fresh. It has to be raw. It has to be, you know, like I said, you got to hit you in the first couple of minutes or else you're done. You know, Sesame Street, on the other hand, you know, they still have that. They're still doing the same connecting points, and they're using a lot of the stuff that happens in today's world to connect with children, you know, so they're still trying to do all that. So, but when it comes to the Muppets, it's hard to really say, like, how can you, you know, bring this type of impact back to an audience when it's already been seen, or it's already been done, or it's already been played out, right? And maybe it is the fact that there's no more soul to these shows, because Disney owns the property and Disney wants to create a product that they believe the audience would like to see. And that's why the tone shift. Now, Disney doesn't own Sesame Street. They only own the Muppets, right? So they're trying to adjust the show to today's market. So they feel the comedy there is the parodies, the play on the things that we see a lot out there every day. They think that is the comedy that we want to see, or the type of entertainment we want to see from the Muppets, right? And maybe they need more of that connecting tissue. They need more of that. What can we connect personally to the audience? Bring that emotion back, to bring that those feels back. You know, there's a reason why I love the Muppets, because they made me love them. You know, with the things that they would talk about, with the relationships between the Muppets. You know, the Muppets now, you hardly had the Muppets interacting with each other. Every individual Muppet or duo had their own show, and they were just trying to put on a show for everyone. But you never saw any of them interact with each other like a community. You know, that was great. That was the one thing that was great about the Muppet Show back in the day, is that everyone was trying to do a show, but they were all together. You know, so, you know, they had their beefs, they had their, you know, little romantic relationships. You know, they had Kermit running around frantic trying to corral everyone, and, you know, understanding why Gonzo is this way, and Fozzie, don't tell that joke, that's not funny. Miss Piggy, all right, yeah, you look great, you know, get along with this celebrity or what have you. Maybe it's because of the pandemic that they weren't able to do a program like that, or, you know, but we don't know what's in store in the future for the Muppets, because I don't think the reception of Muppets Now is that great. I haven't heard about them picking up a second season. There hasn't been that much talks about a new Muppet movie, a movie related with the Muppets. So so to Frank's point, he could be right. There seems to be some sort of soul that's missing, and it is unfortunate that he can't seem to work well with Disney. Now, let's play devil's advocate here too. I've heard many times in many stories that Frank Oz is a difficult person to work with. He doesn't like to follow orders. Him and Jim had a lot of run-ins and butted heads many times. This is very well documented. The more documentaries that you watch or behind the scenes that you watch with them working on the Muppet Show and doing read-throughs and all that kind of stuff like that. And maybe Frank Oz is just that, older guy who is just hard to get along with, and it's his way or the highway. Doesn't want to listen to anyone. And Disney, I'm sure, is filled with a lot of more younger generation people working there behind the scenes. So it could be a mixture of that too, why he's not getting the work or not getting the love from Disney. But it is kind of unfortunate to hear that and to read about that. But it's an interesting article regardless, and I think you guys should check it out. Like I said, I will leave the link for you in the description for you guys to read. If you have the nostalgia like I do, I think it's very worth reading. And Frank Oz, I mean, he is a brilliant mind, great creator, great director. And like I said, those movies are still some of my favorite movies, of all time. And Bowfinger. Don't forget about Bowfinger. That is like one of the best underrated Eddie Murphy comedies with the great Steve Martin. So I highly recommend that you watch that. So that's about all the topics that I'll be discussing about this week. Again, give me feedback. Has this been entertaining for you guys? What kind of topics or stories would you like me to talk about? I actually was going to talk about another topic, but because of time constraints, I couldn't get enough of the research. And then an article just dropped about it earlier today that I didn't have time to digest. So hopefully in the next episode, that's something that I could discuss. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. But before we go, like I mentioned previously, there is a weekly segment, Collectable of the Week. I like to highlight a collectible that may be of interest to you guys. As I mentioned many times, I am a collector, not as big as I used to be, but I still appreciate the fine world of collecting. And this week I am going to highlight Build-A-Bear. Now you're going to be like, Build-A-Bear? Like, that's not for me. I'm not a 8-year-old kid who wants, a teddy bear or what have you. Or Build-A-Bear. In the Build-A-Bear workshop, when they first started, they were a great resource to kind of send bear gifts to people. It started as almost like a bear telegram type of company where you go there, or like an American Girl. That's what they call it, right? The expensive girl dolls, kid dolls that you take your daughter to, and you buy her dress and fix her hair, what have you. But it's kind of like along those lines, where it was a place where you could just build your own custom teddy bear. Now, throughout the years, they've expanded, and they've included a lot of like licenses and all that. They're very big with Disney. I saw one recently where they have now a Lion King, so you could like build your own Simba. They have an Ursula, so you could kind of build your own Ursula, which is kind of cool. But it's because of that Build-A-Bear has come more into the to the front of collectors, because the quality is great, and the look and feel of these bears that you could custom make for yourself are so well done and will look great hanging around on a desk or a shelf or what have you. So recently they started they have a new IP with Lord of the Rings. So now you could build your own Lord of the Rings Build-A-Bear. You could have a Frodo with his elven cloak and his own ring that's dangling around his neck. And what's great about it, it has sound too. So there are going to be 5 phrases that he'll be able to say. You could do your own Gandalf with his, his gold hat and get up with his own walking stick and his, and all that. Really, really cute. And like I said, the quality of these figures, these dolls, are just so well done. They even have an exclusive Gollum. If you think Gollum is cute, this iteration is not that bad. But these are so very cute and very unique. And along with that, something that they've also done is they've started expanding their Star Wars line. Now you could have your own Jawa with sounds as well. And the Jawa, I have to say, is adorable. Like, this is one of the cutest things I have ever seen. It's just, he comes with his own little blaster. And also this, like I said, this comes with sound as well. But just how adorable is that? For a Star Wars collector, to have this on your shelf, I think is the best thing ever. Now, of course, they have Grogu because of the Mandalorian. And out of all the Grogu dolls and figures out there, I would have to say that this is probably one of the better looking ones. It's soft. The face, I feel like they got correct. And it just looks adorable. It just looks so cute. Everything here is all about cuteness and all about bringing smiles and joy to all of you guys. Smiles on your faces. If you want Grogu in his little mobile pram, they even have that for you there too. And they're not cheap. They're not cheap. Like, the Jawa will set you back $58. Grogu will set you back $44. Frodo is like a good $63. Gandalf is $65. Or $57 without the sound. So, they're not cheap. But I think for the quality and, just the fun, the overall fun that these will provide yourself or your kids or a kid that you know, a Star Wars fan that you know, Lord of the Rings fan that you know, I think it's well worth the cost. So yeah, Build-A-Bear. I may get one of these. I don't know. I'm not really that big into stuffed collectibles that much these days. But who knows? I have my little Ewok that I got. I like my little Ewok who makes his own sound. Yeah, I have my little Ewok. So who knows? I might add that to the collection there. But with that being said, guys, that is this week's episode. Again, thank you so much for listening in and watching. Like I always say, spread the love. Share this with people who you might think find this type of content interesting. If you find me interesting, do spread the love and share. The easiest and cheapest way to show your support for the channel, doesn't cost you a thing, to hit that like button, hit that subscribe if you haven't done so already, and go to your podcast platform of choice, follow the LOWKEY Geek channel there, and download the episodes and give them a listen. And I will catch you all in the next episode. Until next time, have a wonderful Labor Day weekend. Stay cool, stay classy, stay safe, and I'll see all of you guys next time. All right, y'all. Peace.